in general, it's really hard to nail down an exact price. I don't think there is any agency out there that can tell you with certainty exactly how much you're going to spend. What they can do is use resources like the Men Having Babies website that takes and polls people who've been through all of our actual programs and asks them, what did you spend? And we do have the people who are the spreadsheet keepers that we go to them at the end of their journey and say, what exactly did you spend and on what? I'm privileged to run a lot of the GPAP escrows, and so I see a lot of budgets across a lot of agencies. And I've got to say that Ron's system is a really good system. So when you decide on your agency, and then when you decide on your surrogate, your agency should be able to say, look, based on your surrogate and her unique circumstances, here's the minimum you're going to spend, the maximum you're going to spend, and then what is the probable amount. And now that's looking into cases it's a really good journey. Inevitably, there will be a few bumps in your road, and you should know at the time that a bump occurs, say your first transfer doesn't take and you need to do another transfer. Your agency and your clinic should be able to say to you at that point, okay, this is how much this is now adding to your journey, this is your new minimum number, this is your new maximum number. And they should be able to adjust as they go along. I've seen a lot of the GPAP escrows, as events happen in their surrogacies, they'll send me a revised escrow and say, look, here's the new budget, look, here's what happened. These people were lucky, they got twins, here are the additional expenses we can account for them to have. So that's a really good way to look at it, is to first see what the people who've been through that program before have spent, and then also get the average based on your surrogate. How expenses vary based on surrogate circumstances and requirements. Well, the main circumstance that's going to vary their compensation is their level of experience and how many pregnancies they've carried. Like Vicki said, with an experienced surrogate, you're paying for a known outcome. We know how her body responds to the IVF medication. That's a really important thing, because a normal pregnancy is not the same as an IVF pregnancy. And someone who's really good at being normally pregnant through traditional means is maybe not necessarily a good candidate. So that is really what you're paying for. You're also paying for someone who we know follows through on their duties and requirements, signs all the paperwork, does all the injections on time, and has ultimately had a good result. So again, in our program, and I'm sure in many others, the experienced surrogates will come in with a number that they have in their head. And they've all been on the internet, and they're in the forums, and they all talk, and they say, okay, well, I'm a second-time surrogate, got good insurance, I've delivered twins, I carried to term, I'm going to ask for $35,000. And so you would know that coming in on a profile, you would see the surrogate's compensation. Another major factor for surrogate circumstances and requirements is whether they are a stay-at-home mom or whether they are working. Your agency should be able to get a copy of her current pay stub and tell you what, again, is the maximum you would spend on her lost wages. If, for example, what if something went terribly wrong and she had triplets and was on bed rest for the whole last half of her pregnancy? Super rare, but if you put in 2 embryos, it certainly could be a possibility. So your agency should be able to say she makes $20 an hour. Normally we would cap that at 20 weeks of pregnancy in our agency program, and so you would know what the maximum out-of-pocket is going to be based on her actual wages. And again, that's going to differ a lot whether she's a stay-at-home mom, if she's a teacher, or if she's one of our more expensive professions, which would be a nurse. Those nurses can make $30, $35 an hour, which can add up if they end up being on bed rest for an extended period of time. But nurses are also great surrogates because they understand the medical protocol, they understand all the injections, and they've got an intimate knowledge of medicine, and they're not scared or intimidated by it. So it's a toss-up. And then another thing that has a really big effect on surrogate circumstances and requirements is their cost of living. What states they live in, that comes down to how much they're spending on a day-to-day basis. I'd say that's less of a factor, but it is still a factor if they're living in a more expensive state versus a Kansas. And finally, the last thing that we see that is a factor to consider is the number of children that she has in her care. That's going to affect things like if she needs to pay additional for childcare to fly to your clinic for transfer. If she's got 4 children, $11 an hour is not going to cover her childcare. If she has 1 child, likely it will. So that is a consideration. If you have a surrogate with 3 or 4 children, she may ask for a higher number of per hour childcare than, say, a surrogate with fewer children or a surrogate with even older children. So that is something to consider. Really, a lot of it will come down to the analysis of an individual surrogate's profile when it's presented to you.
Any comments about that? Maybe just about the travel. I mean, that's one circumstance that could change greatly. Surrogates close to the clinic, far from the clinic. They should just drive there or airplane.
It depends on where your surrogate's located, but if the agency is coordinating multiple components of your program and you have an egg donor in one state and a clinic in another state and a surrogate in another state, the surrogates that live close to the clinic will be able to have travel expenses that may be mileage and parking. It's not going to significantly exacerbate the amount you pay for the services of that surrogate. If she lives in California and your clinic is in Connecticut, every time there's a transfer, you're going to have to pay for her airplane ticket, possibly a travel companion, her hotel, her food, and a number of other related ancillary expenses. So selecting surrogates based on their geographic location is also a circumstance that you should take into consideration in evaluating how much your surrogate's going to cost. And if there is a failed transfer, those will all be repeated and incurred again.
Yeah, and the only thing I would add to that is location is a determining factor, but also you might find someone who's not in the location, but she has insurance, so you don't have to pay for insurance, or her compensation package is a good one, so that you might be able to live with having a surrogate who's not near the clinic. So you have to kind of look at all the factors together in a global sense and not really pick and choose and see what the overall package will be. Really, because sometimes it's good to have a surrogate in another state. Maybe we find the great surrogate for you that matches all your other requirements. Maybe she has insurance, will do a double embryo transfer, will terminate for a birth defect if that's what you want. So there's a lot of factors that go into the surrogacy match, and I mean, compensation is one big one, but it's certainly not the only one. But even the compensation can be broken down. So if you're paying more here, you might be paying less here. Maybe she's not working, so maybe you don't have a lost wages exposure, but you will be paying for travel. So just put it all together again in the package. And the other thing that I like to tell people is, you know, in terms of the matching, you've heard this before today, but the wider the pool of candidates, the sooner you'll be matched. So you don't want to just say, oh, I want a carrier in Connecticut because then she won't have to travel. You have to look at the whole big picture.
And I think you also have to consider, I tell a lot of people this, location is important for your surrogate, but choosing a clinic to be near your surrogate, which a lot of people ask me, should I find my surrogate and then pick a clinic near her? You're going to spend a lot more if you pick a lesser clinic close to your surrogate to try to save on travel costs than you would by picking an excellent clinic who's going to get you pregnant on the first transfer. So that is a consideration. Your agencies should be able to guide you through that cost decision-making process because there are a lot of factors involved.
This isn't really that confidential, but it does affect how much your surrogate is going to cost you. Every surrogate either has insurance or doesn't that will cover maternity for surrogacy, and there are various options. The reality is, even if you have a surrogate that has insurance that will cover a surrogate maternity, which is the best possible case and the kind of surrogate we all favor, every surrogate's going to have a different policy through their group employment or their individual policy, which means somebody needs to review and analyze the insurance policy to see how much are her co-pays and for what does she pay them. What is the deductible on her policy before her insurance kicks in at all? Because the deductible on her policy will be cash out of pocket to you. And that deductible may be $500 for a year, it may be $5,000 for a year. And then, once the deductible has been paid, is there 100% coverage or is there 80% coverage? Because if there's 80% coverage and the out-of-pocket maximum isn't $5,000, it's $15,000, that $15,000 will be the cap on how much you have to pay. So when you select a surrogate, even with insurance, you will have insurance expense, and that insurance expense will vary by surrogate and policy, and you need to be well informed about what your maximums are as you plan your budget.
And our, we average it as about $3,000 for maternity and delivery co-pays and deductibles, and $2,000 for newborn co-pays and deductibles. But this is probably an average that, if it's even true, that is made out of many, many different individual cases, so it could really vary a lot. And what I meant before is I don't want to stay mysterious when I said the confidential part of the conversation. We're going to move now to talk about issues pertaining to insurance, because what we're alluding to, maybe some of you are lost, is that it used to be until recently that most surrogates' insurance, if they had one, and if they didn't, you had to buy one, had exclusions that meant that surrogate, once she has a medical expense that is related to her being pregnant for somebody else, that medical expense will not be covered by the insurance that she might already have. So we saw a lot of that, and that meant that many people had to buy a specific insurance by Lloyd's of London, very expensive, with a lot of deductible, most likely, and high, self-pay, that covered surrogate even if she's carrying a baby for somebody else. Now, recently, with the Affordable Care Act and with other trends that we're looking at, things are different probably. And I want to now get into the discussion about that. And we just want to, be mindful of the fact that this is politically charged. There are people out there that could potentially consider that to be, outrageous that, because of Obamacare, now more gay people can become parents or something like that. So, we're going to keep that there for off the CNN report. But other than that, it's not really confidential. We're going to put it on YouTube. It's all, we're going to talk about things that are perfectly legal. It's just that we want now, and Steve, maybe you can help us start explaining that in a more systematic way. What are the laws and practices that affect whether a surrogate has a valid insurance, and possible exclusions, and also how it varies across states, and if you get the Affordable Care Act, what is the timing and the other issues you have to consider when you get that, and under what circumstances is there still a need to get, if at all, the Lloyd's of London or some sort of an expensive policy, either as primary or as a backup policy.
So he gave me the whole elephant to eat. So I'll try to do the best I can one bite at a time. So laws and practices that affect insurance coverage. First of all, let's start with some basic insurance law. Insurance companies can draft their own policies, and most of the policies that are drafted have a provision that says we can solely interpret the scope and terms of coverage, and we decide whether anything is covered. Then they write out the coverages and they write out the exclusions. And if something isn't covered or isn't written out, it's not covered. So some people will say if it's not surrogate maternity in the policy, the coverage doesn't exist, even if maternity coverage does. So you have to be aware that insurance companies maintain a lot of authority. That being said, generally speaking, my experience with insurance policies is this. They fall into three groups. One is it's very clearly not excluded. There's no language in the policy anywhere that excludes surrogate maternity. That's a reliable policy, subject to some cautions that I'll get into later. The second are policies that have very clear surrogate maternity exclusions. It appears in the infertility benefits section. It appears in the maternity benefits section. It appears in the well baby care section. And there's a definition that defines it as including all obstetric and other postnatal and maternity care. So policies with exclusions that broad and that insidious throughout the policy exclude surrogate maternity. Then there's the policy in the middle. It has a surrogacy exclusion, but it only appears in the infertility benefits section. It doesn't appear in the maternity benefits section. Does that exclude surrogate maternity? It depends on your insurance company and how they choose to interpret that. And some will interpret that as an exclusion and some will interpret it as coverage. You may have to appeal an administrative denial under that type of exclusion if the company denies. If they deny and you appeal administratively, I'm 6 for 7 and succeeding in those kinds of appeals. And in the other one, the company decided to change its policy and afford surrogate maternity coverage, so I think I'm 7 for 7. But you may get resistance from the insurance company, and that's what I call an ambiguous exclusion. An ambiguous exclusion under most surrogates or insurance law is construed against the drafter of the policy, meaning against the insurance company, and in favor of coverage, meaning you have a good chance of winning that appeal if you have to make it. That being said, there's a difference between group policies and self-funded plans, and self-funded plans have much more latitude under federal law to deny. They can draft an exclusion that says, oh, we're not going to cover pregnancy for anyone with blue hair. And they'll probably get it upheld because self-funded plans have broader latitude. So you have to be looking at the insurance coverage through some very complex sets of filters. In addition, you're looking for a surrogacy exclusion. Depending on how it's drafted, is a company's exclusion for we will not pay for any illness or injury related to work for profit? Is that a surrogacy? I've never seen that asserted by a company, but I always call that out because I could see under the right wording of that exclusion that an insurance company could bootstrap a denial. If they say we are not going to cover anything for any amount you would not have to pay but for the existence of this policy, well, you're going to draft a surrogacy contract that pretty much insulates the surrogate from payment. So with the right wording in the right situation, could an insurance company try to bootstrap that into it? Now, possibly. I haven't seen it yet. But as you go through an insurance policy, it's not just related to surrogacy exclusions. It's related to all exclusions that could potentially apply to surrogacy, and every policy is different. So you need to very carefully evaluate that with the help of an insurance experienced professional. I recommend an attorney. I don't know how you are generally, if you're reviewing them or sending them out. There are also professionals like Art Risk Insurance in California and New Life that also evaluate policies in various states. So you can either hire a specific insurance professional, use an attorney outside your agency. If you're lucky, you have an attorney inside the agency making that evaluation, but that's something you need to deal with. And that's just kind of scratching the surface. I'm going to pause there to see if either of my co-panelists have comments on that.
I think everything he said is accurate. Our agency does utilize Art Risk, which is, as he said, an independent company in California, and they do issue those 3 kinds of letters. I think the one thing that he did not touch on, which can also complicate and throw a huge wrench into the process, is every year the policies change. What we're seeing this year is open enrollment is beginning in November, and we have more than 50% of our surrogates on a plan that is being discontinued. So when that happens and you're already under contract with your surrogate, all of a sudden you are thrown back into the mix of now re-shopping for a policy that's going to cover the surrogacy for which you are already in the middle of. That stresses a lot of people out. One of the reasons we like Art Risk is that they offer a program where they're going to be able to find a policy and monitor it for you. And they do a really good job of that. But I agree with Steve, you need an insurance expert to guide you through that process. That does happen a lot. So that happens every November. And then things also happen along the way where the surrogate's husband loses his employment and the insurance was through his insurance company at his job. Now you're going to face a choice of, do you pay COBRA, the premiums of which can be exorbitant? Or now do you try to get Obamacare, ACA insurance in the middle of an enrollment period, because you can only enroll once a year, but if they lose their insurance or have a life event, you can do it in the middle of a year. So now you're trying to figure out what is the best option for you. You're going to need a lot of guidance based on the differing costs, how far along you are in your pregnancy. A lot of things come into play at that point. But insurance is not a one-time proposition. You cannot just make one decision about it and say, I'm never going to have to worry about this again. It's a constant evolving, every year it changes, every month it changes process. And you need a good team to support you through that.
So it sounds really shocking and really distressing because insurance is so unreliable. Because essentially what we're saying is you can't control if the insurance company changes the terms of coverage in the group plan with the employer at the end of the year. You can't control if someone is fired from their job. Even if you have insurance and start the journey that way, things beyond everybody's control can happen to eliminate the insurance. That being said, I've been through hundreds of surrogacies, as I'm sure my co-presenters have been, and by and large, the insurance issue has remained stable, subject to a minority of exceptions, which again have been generally successfully navigated through. So I don't want you to hyperventilate about it. I just want you to know it's important.
It's actually dramatically better now than it was even 5 years ago with the advent of the ACA and with companies like Art Risk who are professionally reviewing policies. So it's better than it was. Which,
Can I ask a question that might help clarify that? For the most part, what we're talking about is the coverage of what is a routine pregnancy and what is a routine or more or less within a certain spectrum of delivery. But there's the other component, and that could typically not be much more than what, $10,000, $12,000 overall? What's the average cost?
That depends on the location of the country.
But just give us
It
ranges.
could be 20,000, 15 to 25,000.
If you paid out of pocket for maternity and delivery?
Yeah, it could be less if you negotiate a
Okay.
self-pay.
Yeah, I didn't think it was as
And
high
that's
as
if nothing
fine.
goes wrong. I mean,
Yeah.
if you are
That's
trying to, yeah.
the distinction I want to make. And then, if something goes wrong, catastrophic care, isn't that always now covered under the Affordable Care Act? Even if there is a surrogacy exclusion, if the surrogate, God forbid, all of a sudden has some sort of an emergency, she had, I think one of you had to fly a surrogate to a hospital. I remember a case where a surrogate had to be flown to a different state in a helicopter, whatever, for a heart condition. Isn't that now covered always by the Affordable Care
Well,
Act?
always is a strong word.
It's not tested yet. I mean, no one's really put that to the test.
I mean, here's the thing that I just want to say. First of all, 6 o'clock after this long day, insurance. Really, Ron?
There's wine and cheese for
I
those
mean,
who
my
survive.
brain is fried. I don't know about yours.
My head's ready to
But
explode.
there's so much like plans and options and things to think about when it comes to insurance. What you have to have confidence in really is us in guiding you, and then when you have a surrogate that you're thinking of committing to work with, then we look at her, and then we see what she has, what she needs, what you have to do about it, and then we put the insurance plan in place. So it really takes shape and has something that you can get your arms when you have your surrogate. So right now, I think that was like, so those are some good comments. We've done a lot of this. Many, many babies have been born through surrogacy. Many, many, many insurance policies have covered surrogacy, maternity. It will work out, but we have to work it out together and make some decisions as you go along.
Yeah, I think the insurance issue is one of the biggest reasons I am hesitant when people find surrogates online in independent matches and rely on what the surrogate tells them her insurance coverage is. Yeah, I have insurance, meaning I had 3 babies and it covered maternity. She has no idea if it covers surrogate maternity. Yeah, I did surrogacy before, you're my second set of parents, and it covered. Of course, I told the hospital staff it was an adoption, not a surrogacy. Or I just got lucky and I didn't get monitored. So this is a complex issue and probably the biggest thing that you need to understand, you need to associate with professionals. It may be an agency, the good agencies will be all over this issue and protect you, or it may be a good experienced art attorney, even if you're not using an agency, but make sure you consult on the insurance as well as the contract and the parentage proceedings. Just take cautious steps.
A lot of the really good attorneys you go to, they will ask for either, all the attorneys we work with, either ask for a copy of the Art Risk review so that they can review it with their intended parents and explain what their legal exposure is based on that review. Or if a review was not done, which is not the case for our agency, but maybe is if they came to them with an independent match, they will volunteer to spend the time to go through the policy and review it themselves. But yes, do not try to review it on your own. You need an expert. That's just too complicated.